I would say the best use case that I've seen with ArcSight is the ability to look at an organization and all its underlying components. So, for example, the ability to differentiate between systems, users, assets of different kinds, and it's basically its use. We've been able to use ArcSight in breach situations where very fast integration is done, products are natively supported, and essentially being able to identify exfiltration of data, connections to odd, suspicious regions of the world, and access that is just not typical in most enterprise networks.
I've seen ArcSight do some really cool stuff. I was at this customer once where they wanted to track key activities that employees were doing over the course of the day. So we identified those activities and brought in Identity View to track the actors and tie those activities back to those actors.
A specific case with ESM and autonomy would be the high-risk email user data IP leakage, so intellectual property leakage out of a company. So let's say you have an employee that is thinking of leaving the company and they're trying to steal some intellectual property to bring to a competitor, for instance. ESM would simply monitor the exchange logs from, let's say, an email exchange server. And an exchange log is very simple. It gives you user information, who's sending the email to who, and then also a message ID, and that's basically it. With that information, you can't really gain a lot of context around that. But at the same time, you have the Autonomy Idle product also processing the actual emails and content in the email, as well as the attachments involved. It's understanding the context around what's being said in the email, the sentiment, was it negative, positive, neutral, what's being discussed, the attachment, is it relevant to your HR department, your research and development department. It can build that context around that to where ESM, whenever it sees an email leave your organization, so go to the outside, it could be to that individual's personal email address or a competitor's email address, you can basically have ESM respond to IDLE and say, send me more detailed information about this specific message because it's been triggered. That information comes back highly improved with not only your sender, receiver, subject, but also the sentiment involved and a weight score depending on a certain category. So this email had to do with research and development, and it got an 80% hit that it was relevant to research and development. And from there, you can actually go and look at the actual email, understand what was sent out, what was leaked, and hopefully stop the bleeding as soon as possible before it becomes too bad.
The coolest use cases that I've seen have been around fraud because it's outside of the box. It's not particularly IP-based type detection or user-based type detection. It's usually crunching numbers from applications to look for fraud, which is something that's completely outside the box.
The most amazing thing I've seen ArcSight do is actually have a customer who the events per second that they were actually needed to collect were about 170,000 events per second, with a projected of about 360,000 events per second in the next few years. So we were able to provide a solution where we had a tier of loggers be able to handle all that information, and basically based on the use cases on this forward up, only maybe less than 1% of those events to be actually analyzed by the analyst based on the requirements of the customer.
The coolest use case that I've done is probably the automatic payload retrieval with ESM. We had a large customer, a large retail customer that required the IDS payload information to be automatically retrieved and persisted into the database. What we had to do was use the ESM plugin feature and write some Java code to do that for them. And for me, that was probably the coolest thing I had to do with the product.
The coolest use case that I've seen recently is the ability to use ArcSight's correlation engine to do kill chain use cases, which are outside the traditional single use cases. We created use cases in order to do spear phishing attacks. In order to do that, we made use of a lot of data which is largely ignored from a false negative perspective, such as logging users' clicks to open emails or save emails from specific email addresses, and then taking that through a complete 16-step kill chain model.
One of the coolest things that I've seen ArcSight do is enforce compliance in a PCI zone. So I was at a customer environment, and they had a fully segmented PCI environment, and they had a jump box that you had to log into the jump box in order to access any of the PCI equipment, and you were required to have a change ticket open in order to log into the jump box. And we were able to correlate with the Remedy ticketing system to identify if a given login had a open change ticket for the PCI environment, and when they didn't, it would send out a notification to the person who logged in saying you were detected logging into a PCI environment without a successful or without an open change ticket. With that, we were able to go from about 300 or 400 a week policy violations down to about 3 or 4 a week, just by showing people that this was being actively